Right. Good evening, everybody. It's Tavares Nancy from Adai. I'm working together with the Karnak Community Council, and we've been blessed with a grant from the City of New York to address domestic abuse and general healthy relationships. And to that end, we've done several conference calls and workshops in the last few months. You can access any of the previous recordings at adai.org/past-events. You can send in any questions to info@adai.org, or you can send them in anonymously on our form at adai.org/ask-anonymous-question. That's adai.org. So this week is Shalom Bayis Week, and we're up to part 3 of Shalom Bayis Week. We'll be talking about all different aspects of Shalom Bayis, and you can check out the previous ones on our website. Tonight, the topic is the parents' marriage impact for children, and Dr. Elka Jacobs-Pinson will be talking about that with us. Dr. Pinson received her Doctor of Psychology degree from NYU and is licensed in New York and New Jersey. As a psychotherapist, she specializes in treatment of depression, anxiety, and stress, lifespan adjustment difficulties, and trauma. Dr. Pinson also assists young adults in the process of dating in the transition to marriage and parenthood, including postpartum disorders. She's also a certified EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapist, and is trained in emotionally focused couple therapy, and is a certified step-family counselor. She's also the clinical supervisor of therapists at Yale Vialba, and has worked with many different clinical populations over many years, including early intervention, foster care and adoption, child custody evaluations for family court. Dr. Pinson is in private practice in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. She also offers consultations via online, video, and phone. She can be reached at 917-324-2386 or by email at dr.elka, Pinson, Pinson, @gmail.com. Her phone number or email will also be listed on her page on the Adai website. And this evening, Dr. Pinson will outline the main impact of marriage relationship on the children and will identify some of its challenges. So, Dr. Pinson, let's just jump right into it. What is the general role of marriage in a child's life? And how is marriage different than parenting or parents? So let's start with that.
Okay, very good. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Well, marriage is a little different than parenting. Why? Because parenting is can be done independently by one or another adult. But marriage means the combination of two adults, and that creates a completely different entity than each individual. So marriage is the formal joining of two separate different people into a way of being, which hopefully is a lifestyle, a plan, and a program. Now that's simpler to say than do, of course, because each partner still remains to have their own personality and their own individual impression upon the child. Nonetheless, when we talk about the marriage environment, it's different than each parent's skill or commitment to parenting. Parents, in the role of parents, have many roles within that, which range from biological to practical. They give birth, they provide the genetic and the hereditary potentials, they provide physical care, they provide an atmosphere, a setting, vibes, the atmosphere, the expectations, the tone and style. And those provide the color and basis of family life. But children also need other things. They also need emotional support, intellectual stimulation, guidance, and discipline at home. Their development, conduct, and performance in school are profoundly affected by getting attention, affection, and direction, which is most optimally provided in an intact married family. They receive from each parent, of course, they get gender-specific support, right? So even though both parents can parent in their own way, the fact is that fathers and mothers tend to offer different inputs and insights for their child. And research shows that particular roles of mothers, such as to nurture, and fathers, such as to discipline, are important principles for the development of boys and girls. So therefore, and this is kind of interesting, although children do observe their parents as individuals, remember that they see them primarily in their marital roles. They don't usually primarily see their mother as a professional or a working person or a social person, nor do they see their father necessarily as a professional or in his outside roles. They see their parents primarily as interacting in the home and as parent figures. So that's really important, as certainly as important as all the other attributes of each parent, right? Each parent has many, many, many qualities, and not all of which are in the home. But the children's primary observation is in the home. So how mommy is at home and towards Tati, and how Tati is at home and towards mommy is the main their main observation, their main experience. So it's their first model of how marriage should be: cooperation, communication, and roles. And later, of course, as children get older and they go out into the world, they see other marriages, and they may start comparing, good or bad, or certainly different, to marriages elsewhere. But the first and most dominant experience of marriage is certainly in their home. Okay. So what does it look? Yeah. Okay.
So what does it look like? So what does it look like when things are going well?
Okay. Well, when things go well, it's, there's terms in psychology that are kind of common. One of them is called good enough mothering, and I'm going to use the term good enough parenting. Now, what does that mean? Good enough parenting means in most regular homes, under regular circumstances, with regular kids, with regular amounts of resources, kids will grow okay. Okay, and what does that mean? What are those regular ingredients? They're several. Relative consistency of what's going on, whether it be scheduling or people or predictable routines. The home would ideally have moderate emotionality. It would not be highly overstimulating or understimulating. It wouldn't be distressing, nor would it be always party time. It would be a medium range of experiences. The child's needs will be met, the needs for shelter, for food, for protection, for sleep, and so forth. That the care and concern by the parents will be fairly evenly distributed. The children will get enough from each parent to feel fine and to do well with it. And that each parent's role will be somewhat predictable. Somewhat meaning that how they will act towards the children or towards the child is somewhat predictable, that the child knows what to expect pretty much, as opposed to parents who are volatile or reactive or just not steadily available or engaged. It's interesting, some of the main studies on marriage and the family in the last 20 years, of one of them, this seems to be fairly consistent, and this, of course, is the broader American society. 2/3 of United States kids live in a home which has two married parents, and 20% are being raised by mothers only. That seems to be fairly consistent in the last 20 years, and those studies have found fairly consistently that people who come from families with members who are encouraging and engaged have marriages with more positive outcomes later in life. It doesn't have to do, and this is true as well, which I'll go into later, about when do kids do well. It's not wealth, it's not material things, it's not even physical atmosphere per se. It's that there are people who are encouraging and engaged and connected with one another. And growing up in a family that resolves conflict through clear, warm, and assertive communication has benefits not only for children but for adolescents and later marital relationships. That people who came from families with positive interaction were less likely to be hostile later on. No big surprise there. And the overall nature of the family climate still matters for later marital outcomes. Children need attention. They need attention. It doesn't spoil them. On the contrary, giving them one-on-one individualized attention helps them become more independent and more, they feel more secure with the parent, and they feel more able to let go of that and move into the world more solidly. Children who live with married parents do better in school. The Coleman study, which was a classic study about 25 years ago of children and family structure, concluded that the primary predictor of student academic success is not disparities in access to school resources or school facilities, but it was the home environment. Children who came from intact homes had fewer contacts to the parent by the school. In other words, the child was better behaved. They had lower retention rates in different grades. They had consistent engagement in schoolwork. Their performance was much more positive. Kids do better in school when the home environment is stable and together. When they're raised in intact married families, they're more likely to attend college. They're physically and emotionally healthier. They are less likely to be physically or sexually abused. Therefore, they will be victimized less. That's interesting. They're less likely to use drugs or alcohol or become delinquent. They have a decreased risk of divorcing when they get married, and they are less likely to have premature sexual activity or pregnancy.
What does it look like when the parents don't agree and there's marital conflict?
Right, okay. Okay, so marriage conflict is an interesting thing because marital conflict, as we all sort of intuitively know, can be all sorts of different things. It doesn't have to necessarily be explosive. It doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be even nasty. But there are many forms of conflict. There's active hostility, name-calling, and yelling. There is undermining of the spouse, which might be done with a smile, but is nonetheless representative of a conflict. There's subtle forms of conflict with distancing and willfulness and lack of coordination or lack of contact. And those are also forms of contact, different ways of expressing conflict. And usually in most marriages, as we know, there are patterns of interaction. There's, typical things that people disagree about, or typical ways of disagreeing or arguing or fighting, and it could be about pretty much anything. Of course, intimacy and money are the two biggies, but it could be about the children, or it could be about any other number of topics. Those conflicts, of course, they're expectable to some degree, but the extent and how they're managed is the critical variable for children. Of course, conflict, there will be differences between parents, even in good marriages, but the way it's handled is the critical variable. So, for example, if the partners are having a conflict, there's a potential for airing out their dirty laundry in public, whether it be in the street or even in the home, in the public domain of the living room. It could be the atmosphere in the home of lack of coordination or lack of communication. It could be belittling behaviors. And so it could be just discoordination, I think, is probably common. The child then can fall into all sorts of patterns themselves of observation of this, feelings of danger, feelings of, what's the word, alienation. They may feel that they're being pushed or pulled into various reactions. They may have difficulty in identifying with one parent or the other because they don't like what they're doing or they do particularly side with them. So there are potential for loyalty conflicts, or there are also potentials for children to try to minimize themselves by becoming avoidant of a parent. They're afraid of provoking an outburst, or they're worried. They're worried about their own welfare, or they're worried about one of the parents' welfares, how things will go, what's going to happen. Basic security can be threatened. So these are, typical reactions. Parents have the strongest, this is very important, and I think this is where all the literature is now, all the research now is on children's neurobiological development. Children, if you find a child who's been exposed to high conflict, I'm not talking about little acts of disagreement, but high conflict, you'll find children who are at risk to symptomatic behaviors. They will be reactive. They may be activated by things that are not even specifically related to related to their family, but things will remind them, and they will have stress reactions much more easily. And at young ages, children are not as able to self-regulate. They're not able to understand this is part of life, or this is not really such a big deal. From their standpoint, it is a threat to their, whether it's a threat to their safety, or their threat to family integrity, or a threat to in some other way, they have a stress response. The disharmony in a home can contribute to problems in adjustment, in problems in learning, and problems in self-esteem. And there's a lot of research. Unfortunately, there's a lot of research on divorce in the last, 40, 50 years. And we know that kids of divorce tend to have not only do they have a harder time because they're often raised by one parent, but they have a harder time because they've been exposed to a great deal of conflict and irregular lifestyle. So kids can sort of react in several different ways to conflict. They can become hyperreactive. They can be worrisome, preoccupied. They may be afraid of provoking an outburst, so that nobody will, they prefer to be, invisible. So that because if they're visible, perhaps they're going to provoke anger at them, or be made the center of a problem. So they, kind of may minimize their needs or requests. They may at worst become, they themselves may also become violent or agitated in order to get attention. So it could work either way, either to get attention or to not get attention, but in some way there will be a reaction. It's unlikely that a child will not in some way respond to high conflict situations. Women, as adults, certainly are more likely to experience panic attacks, internalized anxiety. So children and girls particularly, but boys too, will internalize a lot of anxiety. Parents who are in conflict because they are in conflict with each other are preoccupied with that conflict. Either they're agitated, or they're preoccupied, or they're worried in some other way, and that means that even unwittingly they will passively neglect the child's needs and concerns. There's only so much brain power, so much headspace to go around. So the literature shows that essentially all adults, this is kind of interesting, all adults with lifelong bouts of depression grew up with a sense of not wanting to make mistakes. And that ability to allow oneself to make a mistake is a very healthy thing, and that's what we do with kids through play. But if they're growing up in a situation where you're not allowed to play, you're not allowed to explore, the atmosphere is kind of dangerous and tentative and explosive, like walking on eggshells, as they say, then children could grow up with a aside from self-esteem issues, a sense of pleasurelessness and a sense of underlying sadness. It may not interfere totally. They may be functional human beings, but there's kind of an underlying sadness that many people experience. Or they may, at more extreme levels, become very alienated. They have frustration intolerance. When parents are preoccupied with their own difficulties, they may not have the patience to give a firm but loving and guiding and gentle hand to help a child. And children end up sort of having to cope for themselves, and they may have to take care of themselves more than a young child ought to, or they may also just have bad role models of bullying or threatening or verbal or physical violence that, of course, doesn't serve them well socially. Children in high conflict homes may benefit from being removed from the conflict. However, children of divorce experience lasting tension as a result of the differences between their parents' values and ideas. So children of divorce are unfortunately always at a disadvantage. At a young age, they must make mature decisions regarding their beliefs and values. But even if they're from quote-unquote good divorces, meaning relatively peaceful, amicable divorces, they fare worse emotionally than children who grow up in an unhappy but low-conflict marriage. So when we talk about an unhappy marriage, a good divorce is better than an unhappy marriage, guess what? The research literature does not prove that true. In fact, the research literature shows that an imperfect marriage is better than even the nicest divorce. And that's interesting because two-thirds of divorces are considered low conflict. There was recent research using a large national sample, and it found that 86% of people who were unhappily married at a point in time and stayed with the marriage, unhappily married, were happier when interviewed 5 years later. In fact, 60% of the formerly unhappily married people rated their marriages as either very happy or quite happy. This is a number of years after they were polled to say that they were unhappy. So time does seem to give benefit to many difficult situations. Okay, there's an interesting study out there called ACEs. It's not really, well, it was a study done by Kaiser Permanente healthcare system in California. ACEs is ACES. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And they did a study that measured 10 types of childhood adversity: sexual, physical, and verbal abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and types of family dysfunction. Bad stuff that happens to kids. And they found that while that childhood trauma was very common, much more than we would ever care to acknowledge, many people had experienced at least one of the things on this scale. By ACEs, you can actually download a copy of it and do it on yourself, or it's a very, very popular, very user-friendly questionnaire with like 10 questions. But the more type of childhood trauma a person has, the higher the risk of medical, mental, and social problems as an adult. So if you had, one event that's bad, 2 or 3 or 4 events might lead to significantly worse outcomes as an adult. And what's interesting is they have found clearly that even though a lot of the events were emotional, they were not medical events, they were emotional events, that these people as adults had significantly higher rates of significant medical problems. The toxic stress of trauma damages the structure and function of children's brains. That explains hyperactivity, inattentiveness, angry outbursts, and other behavior. It affects their ability to learn in school, leads them to use of drugs and alcohol, to do thrill sports, food disorders, and difficulty in coping. The stress experienced as a child can linger in the body to cause chronic inflammation as an adult and result in heart and autoimmune diseases such as arthritis. Childhood trauma can cause the adult onset of chronic disease, diabetes, violence, divorce, broken bones, teen work absence, and so forth. And there's tremendous amount of documentation of all of this. But what's interesting here, and this will be sort of a parting thought, because I think it's very relevant to all of us, is that while often you'll get on an intake or an evaluation of a child, you'll see, let's say they get an ACE score. No, let's go backwards. What's been found is that sometimes if you see a child who has, let's say, bad behavior, problematic behavior, it is so common that you can trace that back and assume that their parent has an ACE score. In other words, if a child is behaving badly, so to speak, it is most likely that the parent has experienced some of these trauma. And the parent's experience of trauma, whether it's sexual, physical, verbal abuse, physical, emotional neglect, or different types of family dysfunction, that the child is paying the price by having problematic behavior. They're paying the price of the parent's experience of trauma. So it's important to know that when a child is acting up, acting out, behaving poorly, doing poorly in some way, it's important to realize that the parent themselves may need a lot of help. That it's not just that the parent themselves may not have the coping mechanisms to handle that child because they themselves are suffering from earlier in life. And carrying trauma as adults impacts parents and parenting. So that to the degree that things are triggered in an adult by their child, whether it be mild, as parents, of course, at times we overreact or we act less than we'd like to, worse than we'd like to think of ourselves. It may be because we have a sore spot, unfinished business, some trauma or mini trauma in our past, something's triggering us. And those things can be attended to and can be worked through with proper mental health care. And that's it, people. And I'm open to questions now. I'm delighted to answer.
Okay, so one question came in. So, wow, there's so much. But if someone did go through that, can this child become a healthy adult?
Okay. Can which child?
Can the child of marital conflict become a healthy adult?
With difficulty. Of course, we all know kids and we all know adults who had hard lives, right? We all know them. And of course, there's a big literature on resilience. Resilience means being able to bounce back. But the resilience is an interesting concept because resilience means that you have, first of all, you've had the hardship. In order to be resilient, it means that you already had hardship. And it would be unacceptable for us to condone hardship, that anybody should have hardship. So right there we have a problem with glorifying resilience. Resilience also has to be built. It's not, I mean, yes, it's true. Some people are born with better genes or they're built with thicker skins, but we also can't rely on that. So generally speaking, yes, people can function and people can get along. And just like I said before about depression, there are many people among us who do quite well in life. They perform all their duties. They are solid citizens. They look good. But there's a tremendous amount of sadness. It might come out in low self-esteem. It may even come out in self-doubt or low functioning. And again, they're high-functioning people who themselves are lower functioning than they might be. So people can survive, but there's always a cost. There's a cost. Stress has a cost. Too many stressors, as we just heard, cause medical impairment. It's a direct correlation here. It's not you might get sick if you had a hard childhood. The higher your ACE scores, the more bad events you had in your early life, the more likely, guaranteed, you will have these various awful medical, several of these medical conditions. Medical or could be alcohol abuse or drug abuse or something like that, but bad outcomes. It's almost guaranteed. So yes, individuals can rise above it, but not easily, and I would want to bet on it.
So can someone who's observing a family member or a neighbor or a friend having marital conflict, can they do something to help the child mitigate some of that stress?
Well, I mean, without question, of course, an ear to listen to, to the child, to befriend the child, to debrief the child is always a good thing for any child. But what the child actually, that's sort of debriefing after the fact. What the child actually sees on a day-to-day basis, even if they're not involved in it, even if the parents are arguing between themselves and has nothing to do with the child's exposure to a high degree of stimulation, to a high degree of conflict or agitation or emotionality will leave an impact. So it's not just being debriefed or getting somebody to give you a pep talk. It really is the actual exposure on a day-to-day basis that does the damage.
But so just to be clear, you said that from what I understood is that it's better to be in an intact, slightly with conflict rather than in divorce. Did I get that right?
That's the research. What it shows, that even if it's a low conflict situation. Let me see the exact wording, because it is rather interesting. Where was that? A low conflict. Where was that? A low conflict, non-ideal marriage is better than a low conflict, non-ideal marriage is better than a divorce, than an amicable divorce. The structure of having a two-parent home, that intrinsically, assuming all else is equal, right? No, serious other kinds of problems like poverty or other stressors. But the fact of having two parents is intrinsically better. Two parents in one home.
Can I extrapolate from that when you're doing shidduchim, that
yes,
that someone from a conflict home is, I don't want to even say it, but is that right? Is it right to assume that someone? I mean that someone who comes from a divorced family will possibly have some of these symptoms, or will have some of these symptoms?
Yeah, well, everything's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that parents who stay together are having high conflict, but nobody talks about it because they're not divorced. So what the child's been exposed to under any circumstance is very important, right? There could be parents who stay together, but there may be controlling parents, bad parenting in other ways. So you have to look at each picture really, really individually. What was the nature of what was going on? What was the nature of the relationship then? What was the child exposed to? What mitigating influences have been, provided or have happened? How does the child understand it? The young adult, how do they understand what went on? What is their takeaway message from it? It's not simple. It's not a tit for tat kind of a thing.
So if a child of divorce grew up, let's say, in his grandparents' home with his mother or his father, and saw a intact marriage from his grandparents.
Yes, okay.
Would that be helpful to that child?
Well, certainly, because what you want is the child to have the observation firsthand of workable long-term marital relationships. That's the key here. You know, divorced parents can be wonderful, wonderful people. You know, we're not. The goal of my talk was not to rank on divorce. It was simply to talk about the ideal, you know, and what the research shows. And if both parents are cooperative and helpful and devoted to the child, that's definitely a lot of plus signs. But of course, bottom line in marriage is what's the goal? The goal is to have two people working together, working it out, at times compromising and coordinating and being, you know, both role models. That's you know, that's just about
it might be the same thing. So the step parents can achieve the same thing: a healthy second marriage for the parents.
Yes, absolutely, a healthy, cooperative, you know, relationship.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that came in. If one parent is seemingly healthier than the other,
yes,
what can the healthier parent do to mitigate some of what the unhealthy parent is doing in the marriage and in the family?
Okay, so, you know, again, the word healthy or unhealthy, I don't know what they mean by unhealthy, you know. So I have to kind of work around that. What is unhealthy? Unhealthy could be somebody who literally has a mental health disorder, or it could be a judgment, okay? And those are two different things. If somebody has a mental health disorder, then they have to be kind of cut a little bit of slack, because there are many things that are happening that they may not either be aware of or unable to do much about. You know, they're not totally responsible for all of that. If it's a workable relationship and one partner is taking a bit more of the responsibility because the unhealthy partner can't take that responsibility, then the healthier partner has to at least be as respectful and as polite about it as possible. You know, in other words, it's not just what they do, but also how they relate to the other person. One of the worst, Gottman, the marriage researcher and therapist, talks about I forget off the top of my head the kinds of the most dangerous things in a marital relationship, and he calls them the four horsemen. Let me see if I can remember what they are. But basically, if you disparage the partner, that's one of the worst, errors you can make. To put down, you'll put criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. The four horsemen of the apocalypse: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. These are the most serious problems in a relationship. Most relationships can do pretty well when you keep these out of them, So if the healthy person is not using these against the unhealthy person, that they have a chance to succeed.
So what about I don't know, using their healthy person, letting the children know that the other one's behavior is inappropriate?
Well, it depends on what it is. I mean, it's that's a little too general. If you want to make it a little more specific, I mean, obviously, if it's something that a child should know about and should not do, it's a little too general. It's important to leave a lot of leeway if it's an adult behavior. Kind of hard to say. It's a little too general, Devora.
I'll take an example of a recent conversation I had with somebody.
Yeah. That
the husband. And again, this is just the conversation. Not to say that the husband or the wife anymore in any, it's not a gender thing. But the husband doesn't help at all in the house. at all. He expects his home. So the mother wants the boys and the girls to know that this is not normal behavior.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, I don't know about what not normal means either. I never use that word, almost never. It's not. Instead of saying it's not normal, if she would phrase it as it's not desirable, it's not typical, it's not what I would like in my home. You see, once you start saying things like normal, you're already judging and you're already pushing. That's contempt. Okay, we're saying let's not be contemptuous. It may not be ideal. It may be awful behavior. It may be, but you don't want your children to, react to their other parent in that sort of way.
But on the other hand, we want the child to know that this is, as we said, as the children learn from observation, so they are observing. But we want the child to know that what they're observing is not really appropriate marriage behavior.
Right. Say, I would prefer if Daddy would help, or I would hope that when you're grown up, you'll help your wife, or something like that, or it would be nice if he would help more. But to say he's not normal, or he's not, that's not normal, it's a little harsh. I would soften it a bit. And I think there's room to soften it because, in fact, in the world, there are many men who don't help at home, but that doesn't make them valueless. It's just a way of being. Maybe they have other qualities that they, bring to the party.
So, right. Well, I guess from the conversation again is it's that he's a good person, just that she, as a wife, doesn't want her daughter to look for, to date someone who will have that attitude, and she doesn't want her sons to be that kind of husband. So she wants them to be here.
So her best bet would be to raise her daughter to, first of all, it's a value, right? And in some cultures, husbands don't help. So it's a value. And I believe that this is a good value. And I would like you to, in other words, this has to do more with her parenting her children than it does with the husband. It has more to do with how she talks to her kids, what values they are imparted to them, and also what they believe they deserve. Because if a child has good self-esteem, then they will make their own determination about how much their husband or wife will help them. And that's okay, as long as they feel pretty good about themselves.
Right, this has been very informative. Is there anything else, a final thought? Okay. Well then, thank you, Elka. This has been very interesting. I think it gives a lot of food for thought about how much effort we should put into our own marriages as far as for the children's sake. And to that end, we've done several workshops about different aspects of marriage. Tomorrow, Rabbi Taub is talking about how to help your marriage from working on it from yourself without the help of your spouse, and then hopefully the spouse will eventually notice the changes. But we'll talk about that tomorrow with Rabbi Taub. We recently spoke about how to turn conflict into connection. So there's lots of resources on our website as far as previous calls and many interesting articles and books that you can look at and integrate into your own marriage and work on for the sake of the children. So thank you, Dr. Pinson. And if anyone has any other questions, you can send us an email at info@adai.org, or you can send us anonymously at adai.org/ask-anonymous question. And you can check out the recordings at adai.org/past-events. So thank you, Dr. Pinson, and thank you all for joining us tonight.
Pleasure. Thank you all. Good night.